Israel steps up strikes on Gaza ahead of a ground assault, while Prime Minister Netanyahu faces a possible war on two fronts as tensions rise with Lebanon.
Volodymyr Zelensky vows revenge after a deadly Russian rocket strike on a Ukrainian postal warehouse. 1 year in office, Euronews reflects on the achievements and challenges of Italy's first female Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni.
Israel continued to shell Gaza overnight after vowing to intensify airstrikes on the enclave in preparation for a looming ground assault. It warned Palestinians remaining in the north of the Strip to flee south. At a security meeting in Tel Aviv, Israel's defense minister said their war against Hamas could last months, but insisted it will be the last.
קח חודש, חודשיים, שלושה, אבל בסוף לא יהיה חמאס. דבר השני, האויב צריך לפגוש לפני שהוא פוגש את כוחות השריון והחי"ר, הוא צריך לפגוש את הפצצות שלו.
However, the fight against Hamas threatens to ignite a war on multiple fronts. Early on Monday, the Israeli military struck 2 Hezbollah cells in Lebanon. Officials say the group was planning to launch anti-tank missiles and rockets into their territory. Earlier, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu warned the militant group that getting involved would be the mistake of its life. As Israel amasses troops at the Gaza border, the situation in the occupied West Bank is also devolving. Israeli forces have closed crossings into the territory and checkpoints between cities, measures they say are aimed at preventing attacks. According to Tel Aviv, since October 7th, more than 700 Palestinians were arrested, including 480 suspected Hamas members. Meanwhile, Palestinian authorities say 93 people have been killed in the West Bank since Hamas's attacks, in clashes with Israeli troops, arrest raids, and in attacks by Jewish settlers. The EU's foreign ministers gathered in Luxembourg on Monday to discuss global security issues. At the top of the agenda, the war in Ukraine and the Israel-Hamas war. They're also due to examine developments in Armenia and Azerbaijan following Baku's integration of Nagorno-Karabakh into its territory through a military operation last month. Following this meeting, the ministers will take part in the 19th EU Central Asia Ministerial Summit.
At least 22 people were working in this warehouse in Kharkiv when it was hit by 2 suspected Russian S-300 rockets. Those inside were employed by the private Ukrainian postal and courier service Nova Poshta. The company says they had little warning of what was to come and not enough time to take shelter.
Рятувальна операція завершилась. Необхідна допомога надана усім постраждалим, загалом їх 17. 6 людей вбиті цим ударом. Мої співчуття рідним та близьким загиблих. Ми обов'язково відповімо Росії на кожен прояв її терору і на цей удар також.
Local officials say the victims were aged between 19 and 42. A number of the survivors have been badly hurt.
Але на зараз, так як вони вкрай важкому стані знаходяться, вони під спостереженням, і ми чекаємо, коли зможемо, якщо потрібно, ще раз їх брати в операційну. У деяких людей були задіти і легені, і кишечник, і шлунок, печінка, селезінка.
Meanwhile, Kiev's forces have repelled a new Russian onslaught on the eastern town of Avdiivka. Ukrainian officials say a record number of Russian bombs struck the Kherson region in one 24-hour period. It's been 3 weeks since 16-year-old Amita Garan fell into a coma. She's seen here on a security camera at a Tehran metro station. On Monday, she was declared brain dead. How it happened is in dispute. The Iranian high school student boarded a train on October the 1st. Moments later, she was carried back out. An Iranian rights group says Amita was pushed by a member of the so-called morality police for not wearing a head covering and that she fell and hit her head. Iranian officials say there was no physical or verbal altercation between Amita and staff.
Russia has extended the detention of Russo-American journalist Alsu Kurmasheva until the 5th of December. The binational reporter for U.S.-funded radio station Radio Free Europe Radio Liberty was arrested last week on charges of failing to register as a, quote, foreign agent. The channel has called for her immediate release, and her defense attorney says they intend to appeal. Kurmasheva is the second U.S. journalist to be detained in Russia this year after Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich was arrested on espionage charges in March. Victory for the Swiss People's Party after Switzerland's parliamentary elections on Sunday. Securing 28.6% of the votes, the right-wing Populist Party achieved one of its best historic results, securing 62 out of the 200 seats in the National Council. In second place came the Swiss Socialist Party with 18% of the ballots and 2 seats more than in 2019. In contrast to their rise 4 years ago, the Greens finished with 9% of the votes and lost 5 seats in the lower house.
What has Giorgia Meloni achieved after 1 year since she took office? Well, some of her political promises have not yet been fulfilled, the main one being curbing illegal migration. In a recent interview, she admitted it herself, saying, quote, that the results were not what we hoped to see. Her plan to demand Tunisia to strengthen border control in exchange of EU funds has so far failed. And adding to that, many Italians believe that little has been done to deal with unemployment and inflation. But according to analysts, when we look at Giorgia Meloni last year in office as Italy's Prime Minister, the main highlight here is not so much about what she has or hasn't achieved, but rather how much she has transformed as a political leader to adapt to challenging times in the past 12 months. From being a nationalist, Eurosceptical politician, she has become one of Brussels' closest allies. She backed NATO support for Ukraine, building closer ties with US President Joe Biden. According to political analyst Lorenzo Castellani, Giorgia Meloni has created a new style of political leadership.
In realtà ha adottato uno stile di governo che forse non è stato ancora ben analizzato, nel senso che è una via di mezzo tra quella di un politico mediatico, appunto anche con un passato popolare, nazionalista, e invece il silenzio del lavoro. Si è presentata come un leader molto meno incendiario e come politico esperto che non appunto come un leader populista.
Her government's approval ratings remain quite stable. Due to several factors, including the lack of a strong opposition party, chances that she might remain in office for the whole term are quite high.
Noi abbiamo vissuto 10 anni abbondanti di non maggioranze. Con la vittoria, diciamo, del centrodestra siamo ritornati all'interno di uno schema di tipo bipolare, con una maggioranza omogenea. Meloni ha goduto di una serie di vantaggi dovuti anche dalla fortuna. Primo, Salvini è un leader, diciamo, ormai consumato, che quindi più di tanto non può eroderle consenso. Dall'altra parte la morte di Berlusconi lascia Forza Italia scoperta.
Meloni's political leadership could also be seen as a stabilizing factor by many Italians as Italy and other countries face the consequences of the recent Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the Russia-Ukraine war. Giorgia Orlandi for Euronews in Rome.
In one of the UK's poorest coastal communities, the spotlight once again rests on the Bibi Stockholm barge, a 222-room, 3-storey boat chartered by the UK government for 18 months, which docked in July and is now deemed safe again. The UK Home Office has begun moving migrants back on board after they were removed following the discovery in August of Legionella bacteria. Here, on the Isle of Portland, it's a controversial issue.
It doesn't make any sense to me. I don't think it makes sense to most people who really have any kind heart for other human beings, really.
I think most people are afraid of the sort of demographic that it is, which is men, single men, and that's really it.
They should process asylum seekers properly, and if their claim is valid, then they should be integrated into our community. I don't agree with keeping them as prisoners.
As the debate surrounding the backlog of asylum seekers in the UK continues, the Bibi Stockholm, which will eventually be home to a total of 500 men, is seen as part of a potential solution by the government. But the backlog of asylum seekers is big. 175,000 people are waiting to be processed.
A barge in a port on private property behind these barriers, intended to show there was no luxury in the UK's asylum process. But as well as Legionella bacteria, a type of pneumonia being found on board, concerns were also raised about fire safety and about far-right activity in the area. But the UK government says the barge is now safe again and will reduce the cost of keeping asylum seekers in hotels.
I think it's an interesting strategy, but I'm not sure how comfortable the local people are having the barge sat there with that big group of people.
There's lots of people coming over, being assessed as to whether they're economic migrants or refugees. I guess there's a backlog. People need to go somewhere. I'm not sure if this is the right place where they need to go, but they need to go somewhere.
A second judicial review claim has been issued in the UK's High Court to challenge the government's decision. But the UK Home Office says it's confident the barge will house asylum seekers safely and securely.
Reigning champion Max Verstappen produced a superb performance to claim victory at the United States Grand Prix in Austin on Sunday. This was the Dutch driver's 50th career victory and his third consecutive triumph on this particular track. Verstappen proved too strong for Lewis Hamilton, who had to settle for second place but was later disqualified. Lando Norris finished third, completing the podium. This outstanding victory adds another chapter to Verstappen's already illustrious career and sees him equal his own record of 15 victories in a single season.